Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video. Today I'll be showing you 3 games that I played with random opponents online, and it'll be an analysis, and I'll be showing you how you can beat your opponents that you're versing online. So my first game began with e4, e5, knight f3, and knight c6. So all very standard. It's like one of the most common openings. Like the 4 knights could be played, and 4 knights could be played. Italian could be played. Maybe early queen could be played for some weird like openings, or the Vienna could be played. But my opponent went d4, striking in the center. It's a very early strike. We have pawn takes d4, knight takes d4, and knight takes d4 as well. And queen takes d4, obviously. And my opponent has a slight lead in development, but he has his queen out too early, which isn't normally a good thing in chess. So we have pawn to d6. I'm trying to get this bishop out here or out here maybe. And we have knight to c3, a development of a knight. And we have knight to f6, just like fighting for this pawn, actually, really just fighting for that pawn. And we have pawn to e5, which is a slight inaccuracy because now what's happened is after pawn takes, you have you're buying time on the opponent's queen. Now there's 2 pieces to attack the queen, so the opponent has to take with check. And now when queen blocks, after takes, now black is the one that actually has a lead in development. So we have bishop to d3, and we have castles. So instead of white having a lead in development, it's actually black, because normally white, moves first, but it seems that black is actually the one who has a slight advantage. We have castles. We have bishop to e6, just a development of a bishop. We have pawn to a3. We have pawn to a5, just preventing like not really this, but more like here, trying to launch an attack on the queen side. We have knight to e4, trying to reroute the knight here and trying to attack this bishop, or maybe reroute it somewhere else. But knight captures and bishop captures. Now the point of my opponent to actually put his knight there was that if I took, he would take again and target this pawn. So you have to play c6. You have to play c6. c6 is forced. Now bishop to e3 and bishop to d5, looking for a trade. My opponent took, I took back. Now I have a isolated pawn, but it's a passed pawn. So I can push I can move my rook behind it and just push it all the way, and because it's a passed pawn. But my opponent also has a passed pawn of his own, and it can go all the way here if I let the pawn go all the way there. We have rook to d5, just immediately attacking the pawn. We have rook f to d8, and we have pawn to c3. We have pawn to h5. Now I'm mainly focused on launching attack on his king with moves like this, or like this even. We have g3 and we have g6. We have a pawn to b4. We have takes. And now the opponent is slightly better, not too much, but slightly, because now I have 2 sets of isolated pawns, and these pawns are like monster pawns. They're nice. They're nice and well put together. With king to h7, I chose to voluntarily put my king there because my king can't really be touched in this position. There's a dark squared bishop, so I put every single pawn on light squares. So again, the bishop cannot infiltrate, and I also put my king on a light square. So to undermine this bishop, really. We have a bishop to c5, looking for a trade. We have captures. And now the opponent made a slight mistake putting the bishop there, because when you take, you have to take right with this pawn. Now you have doubled pawns, and doubled pawns are much worse than split pawns, because it'll be harder to move doubled pawns together, whereas split pawns are much easier to move. So we have rook to c5 immediately going for that pawn, and my opponent counterattacks with rook to b1. We have rook to d7, now actually threatening to take this pawn. So my opponent has to go rook b5, and I throw in a rook e7, like controlling this open file. Now we have rook a1 trying to go here and win this pawn, but I anticipated that and played rook to c7. So now his attack with this kind of like shuts down. But my opponent already, played rook a7 anyway. But now what's happened is that there's really no attack that my opponent has. And I can actually start to push these pawns. First move my king here and push these pawns and attack this king, because this king is very weak on the back rank, obviously. It's very weak on the back rank. So we have king to g7, and we have pawn to c6, just blundering a pawn completely. We have pawn captures, and rook captures rook. And this is a completely lost position. You can as I said, you can push these pawns, and this king is just like sloppy. It's never, my king is faster than his, because I can always go here, here, and here and attack this rook. It takes 1, 2, 3 moves, but then since this king is being blocked out, it takes 1, 2, 3, 4 moves to defend this. So the king is pretty slow. So we have pawn to f5, and we have king to g2, king to f6, king to f3, and the king is just blocked out from ever touching these squares. And we have king to e3, trying to go around, and it can't go here, but trying to just go around and try and go here, but it can't because the king is covering the square. We have pawn to g5. And we have pawn to h3. We have pawn to g4, and the opponent wanted to keep the center, this side closed. And these two pawns will have a hard time getting out since it's such a close center. We have king to d6 attacking the rook, and we have king to d4. Wow, this position is completely lost. It's a lost position. It's minus 7.4. White is completely dead, and it cannot do anything. And all of its moves are pretty bad. An example, if it goes here, there's a move called en passant, and I can take it, and I might promote, and I might just go here and win this pawn, just completely win this pawn. So we have rook a7, exactly what I said. We have rook c4. This looks scary. This looks very scary. But the next move I made the opponent resign the game. Why? Rook a4. The opponent's pawn is pinned. It cannot take. As I said, the king will hang. And I'm just gonna if a move like this were to be played, unpinning, I would take, and it's dead lost. So after king here, you have discovered attack, and you can't take this pawn because it's defended, and you're gonna win this rook. That's why the opponent actually resigned the game, because the game is dead lost. And so after rook to a4, I won that game, and the opponent resigned. So next game, I played with the white pieces, and the game began with e4, e5, knight f3, and knight c6. We had the Italian, one of my favorite openings to play. We have the what's known as the Ghiaccio piano opening. So where it's basically a mirror opening of the two bishops and pawns. We have knight to c3, kind of fighting for the square, really, because it's unoccupied. 3 pieces, 3 pieces fight for this square, and it's a weak square. So we have h6. It's not really a great move, it's kind of actually better to develop your pieces like this, but h6 is slow. It doesn't really do anything. With castles, we have knight to d4. This move isn't really the best move. After captures, you can always just drop back, attack the bishop. But instead, I went for the weakness here and going for checkmate, actually. Obviously, the knight blocked, and I attacked the bishop. Bishop would drop back to c5, and d3. Trying to bring out this bishop to like here and look for a trade. We have d6. We have h3. Why d6 and h3? My opponent played d6 to actually bring his bishop here and trap my queen potentially. That's why I played h3, and the opponent played a6, attacking my knights. Knight drops back. We have castles. So bishop to e3, looking for that trade. We have bishop to e6, which isn't a move that I don't really like to play, because after captures, there's a really big transformation, and white is actually winning. Why? Because black has two sets of doubled pawns. That's why this move isn't actually that good, and that's exactly what happened in the game. That exact sequence I showed you. So knight jumps back to e3, trying to reroute it here and here. But opponent plays f7, rook f7, which I don't know what it does. It just moves the rook one square, and it does nothing really. We have queen to e3, just going for this weakness. We have knight to h5. With a4, not delaying taking this pawn. Why? Because it would fix one of his problems of having two doubled pawns. And if I actually were to take this pawn, the opponents would have these three pretty strong pawns, and they can, be pushed forward, maybe here, and buy time on my queen. So that's why I delayed taking that. And instead, I played a4. We have knight to f4, captures. Now is the right time to actually take that pawn. With a5, and we have pawn to f3, just preventing this pawn from ever getting here, because this move is a pretty strong move. f3 and b6, attacking my queen. Queen drops back, and rook to c8, centralizing one of his rooks. With queen to e5, going for that weakness, we have rook to f6, defending that. And queen drops back to c3. And, we have another pawn storm by my opponent, obviously trying to attack. I'm obviously trying to create attack on the queen side. We have pawn to b3, and we have queen to e7, trying to like line up his rook, trying to maybe like go after, trying to go here, and line up his king and rook on this file. We have e5 attacking the rook. Rook goes forward, and we have rook f to e1, just centralizing one of my rooks. And as I said, trying to double up on this file. And I centralize my other rook with rook a to d1. We have rook f8. Now my opponent obviously likes connect 4, because there's literally like 4 pieces on one file, and obviously my opponent wants a lot of control on this file. But there's nothing really to control from this file, because the king is actually on the G file, while the opponent is trying to create an attack on the F file, which makes no sense whatsoever. We have D4 and queen to G6, and we have king to F2. Now, this pawn I'm threatening to actually capture this pawn. It's a free pawn. And we have check, goes back, and just like not really a good move, because again, after captures, and captures, this is just a free pawn, this is just a free pawn, and the opponent is just completely losing. With rook to d2, check here, and here, and it was after, actually, it was after queen to e3 that the opponent resigned the game. Why did the opponent resign? Because, you know, these two pawns will be captured, and yeah, the game is just completely lost. But there's a specific sequence of moves. We're gonna have captures, check here. This wasn't actually played in the game. This was like this is a sequence that could have happened. Okay, have here, then queen drops back, and you know, we could have just completely obliterated that pawn. But you know, that's just an example of what could have played. But the opponent, after it was after king to h2, sorry, that the opponent resigned the game, because these two pawns will be won. So that's another win. The last game that I'll be showing you is another game that was played with the white pieces, with e4, e5, knight f3, and you have the Petrov's defense. It's a pretty good defense. Really, because I mean, you can have captures here, goes back. You can have like something like this. But I didn't actually that didn't actually happen. Instead, we had knight to c3 and bishop to b4. I mean, obviously, we had to attack the bishop. Bishop takes, pawn takes. And it's important to note that this pawn isn't free because of this move, and knight drops back, and you can even take with the queen if you want, and you can take with the knight. But that didn't actually happen in the game. We had pawn to d6, and we had bishop to d3, just developing our pieces. Castles, and knight to c6, just standard development, really. And I pinned this knight to the queen, which is a pretty decent move. And we have another pin by the opponent. With h3, captures. And now this knight is under lots of fire. It's being attacked by two pieces, and you know, like, black has to do something about it. We have h6, captures, and captures. And the opponent is actually completely losing this position, because look how open this king is. This king is completely open on this file. He has terrible pawns, and I can even lift one of my rooks to go here and maybe possibly deliver checkmate. We have g4, launching attack on the king, and we have f5, captures. And it's important to note that this just was a complete blunder of a pawn. f5, pawn captures f5. We have f6, just completely preventing, we're completely preventing this move, taking away the square of the king. f6, and we have check, and you know, king moves out of the way. And now what's happened is that this bishop is a monster. It's completely dominating this file. And you know, I attacked the knight, and knight jumps back, and I took the free pawn. My bishop was attacked, and bishop dropped back. Now this bishop doesn't have control of this file, but I did get two extra pawns for that. Rook goes to g8. Not really a move that makes sense, because the opponent could easily capture this pawn. It's completely free. It's a completely free pawn. But I was actually relieved, because I saw that this pawn was free, and when the opponent didn't take the pawn, I said, okay, I'm going to take advantage of that and you know, push the pawn myself. We have h5, sorry. We have bishop dropped back, and we have knight to d5, which apparently, it's a losing move, because it's a free knight. An opponent thought that, you know, this pawn is hanging, it's free, but yeah, it's a free knight. So this game is completely won. Opponent centralizes one of his rooks. I bring my bishop back to, you know, keep an eye on this pawn, because if captures. I'm not actually going to so if captures, I'm not going to capture this pawn, because that'll open my king on this file, so I'm going to capture with the bishop, and my pieces are coordinated excellently. And we have e4 and we have f3 captures, and we have rook to e3, going for this pawn. We have c4 and we have captures, and I said not capturing the pawn, but capturing with the bishop. We have rook, we have what do you call it? Rook to g3. We have king to f2, and rook goes back trying attacking these two pawns. And rook goes to c1, like covering this pawn. This pawn is going to be lost. But the opponent surprisingly actually didn't take for some reason, which is kind of weird. We have h4 trying to push this pawn because it's a passed pawn. And we have e4. It's not a scary move. You can always go here and just defend everything. I go back, which is really bad inaccuracy because now this pawn is completely free. But the opponent again did not take. I protected my bishop as it was hanging, and we have rook to h3 again, just not taking this pawn. I don't know why. And we have bishop to d3, attacking this rook in two different ways. We have check here. We have another check here. We have another check, but this move is a blunder because it just completely hangs a rook, and takes, and the opponent is just completely losing. And the rest of the game is just me trading off until his last piece, bringing my king to try to win his pawns. And by the way, this game was 122 moves long, so I'm just gonna play a little bit faster. But then I won his pawns, all of them actually. I promoted to a queen like this, and the opponent was ladder mated. And I lured my opponent to actually take this pawn. Because why is it's mate in 2 after rook to b7, the king is completely cut off on this rank, and after queen to a8, it is checkmate. That is exactly what happened. And that was the 3 games that I actually played. And as always, thank you so much for watching this video, and have a great day. Goodbye.